Smash the illusion, right now. Forget the nights, forget the romance. Welcome to 14th century London. It wasn't a city, it was a festering open sewer. Think you would survive? Think again. This is an era where rain meant disaster, a sneeze meant a death sentence, and half the population vanished in a blink. But the survivors? They weren't free. They faced monsters worse than the plague, a hunger so primal it turned men into cannibals, and laws so twisted they tried to imprison your very shadow. Do you dare face the true stench of history? Smash the stained glass illusion of medieval romance, right now. 14th century London was not a fairy tale of chivalry. It was an open, festering sewer that assaulted your senses long before you even saw its walls. Forget the grand architecture. The defining characteristic of this city was the smell, an inescapable, suffocating stench of human squalor clashing with civic negligence. By the mid-1300s, London was literally drowning in its own filth. The narrow streets, they weren't meant for leisurely strolls. They were coated in a thick, toxic slurry, rotting animal entrails discarded by butchers, household refuse, and the contents of countless chamber pots emptied freely from upper windows, straight onto the heads of passers-by. The situation reached a nauseating climax in 1357. King Edward III himself, sailing the supposedly majestic River Thames, was physically overwhelmed. He was gagged by the lethal fumes rising from banks piled high with dung. His furious royal order for a cleanup highlighted a desperate reality. The city's commercial artery had become a flowing toilet. For the average Londoner, daily survival meant strapping on pattens, precarious wooden platforms over their shoes, just to elevate themselves above the muck. Every single step outside was a calculated risk. You weren't just walking to the market. You were navigating a biohazardous waste zone. One slip didn't just mean dirty clothes. In this filth, a slip meant infection. It meant death. Yet, if merely walking down the street was a daily battle against toxic filth, imagine the horror when the city's very survival was threatened not by what was sickening them on the ground, but by the terrifying absence of what should have been on their plates. Hunger is not a feeling. It is a beast that hollows you out from the inside, stripping away humanity layer by agonizing layer. Before the Black Death ever touched these shores, London was already a graveyard of the living. It began in 1315. The rains started and simply never stopped. For months, the heavens vomited torrents of water onto the fields, turning the precious wheat harvest into a rotting black sludge. The result was catastrophic. The Great Famine. Bread didn't just become expensive, it became a myth. Prices skyrocketed by 300%, then 400%. Desperate, the city authorities tried to intervene. They slapped price controls on everything, demanding that a fat goose cost no more than 2.5 pence. It was a naive, bureaucratic joke. Merchants, rather than selling at a loss, simply hid their goods. The markets fell silent. The stalls stood empty. London descended into primal madness. The poor didn't just starve. They scavenged like feral animals. They clawed through the mud for roots. They boiled grass. Then the cats and dogs disappeared from the alleys. Whispers in the dark corners of the city spoke of even darker feasts, of graves disturbed and the unthinkable consumption of human flesh. This wasn't life, It was a slow, grinding apocalypse where a mother would trade her dignity for a moldy crust, and a neighbor looked at a neighbor not as a friend, but as meat. The great city was reduced to a skeleton, gnawing on its own bones. But for those few who clawed their way back from the brink of death, for the survivors who finally found coin and food again, a new, insidious cage was waiting. The state wasn't done with them. Now that they could eat, the king decided he would control exactly how they looked. You survived the plague. You survived the starvation. You finally have coin in your pocket because half the workforce is dead, and your labor is finally worth something. You think you're free? Think again. In 1363, the crown launched a new war, not against France, but against your wardrobe. Enter the Sumptuary Laws, the most petty, insecure legislation in history. The nobility looked at the common man, who was finally earning a decent wage, and they didn't see prosperity. They saw a threat. They saw the lines of social hierarchy blurring, and they were terrified. So, they weaponized fashion. It became a criminal offense to dress above your station. Are you a merchant? Don't you dare touch that silk. Are you a laborer? If you are caught wearing shoes with pointed toes, or a tunic trimmed with even a scrap of ermine fur, you aren't just stylish, you are a felon. Parliament literally sat down and dictated exactly what you could put on your body based on your income. They measured the length of your coat. They inspected the fabric of your wife's veil. It was a visual caste system enforced by law. The message was brutal and clear. Stay in your place. You could have the money of a lord, but if you didn't have the blood, you were forced to look like a peasant. The streets of London became a masquerade of enforced poverty, where looking too successful was a one-way ticket to a fine or public humiliation. They couldn't stop the plague from killing the poor, but they would be damned if they let the survivors look like the rich.